Okay. This is my copy of a Dave Grohl DG-335 Gibson guitar. I bought this a few years ago. It's a Chinese replica because I was never able to afford one of the Gibson models. And I think I paid like 400 bucks on it. I've done videos about this guitar before. I bought it because it's the black one, and I already have one of the blue ones. Back in like 2007, 2008, Dave Grohl used to use a black one of these, and it was really cool. So in the Foo Fighters tribute band that I play in, this is the guitar I use for drop D songs. It's a cool guitar. I love it. I was never that big of a fan of black guitars, but this fit the vibe. It works for what I use it for. Until I saw this. For the new album tour cycle, he has been spotted with a white DG-335. So I am about to take on a project which might be foolish, shall we say? And I'm going to be refinishing this in white. Now I have a little bit of experience painting guitars, and from that little amount of experience, I can tell you that I'm not good at it. This might be a huge mistake. I don't really know what I'm doing. I've read a lot on the internet, and this could turn out horribly. I'm not expecting to get as nice of a finish as the guitar already has on it, but I love the look of white guitars, and I love the look of that guitar specifically. And Dave Grohl hasn't really played one of the black ones in a long time, so let's give it a shot. And for all of you watching at home that are just cringing in your seat and saying, no, 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 don't do this, you're probably right. And there's probably a lot of you who are going to watch this video, and throughout some point of it, you're gonna say, no, don't do that, you're doing that horribly wrong. I know. I'm aware that I'm going to make some mistakes. I'm aware that I'm going to learn some difficult lessons about refinishing a guitar. But we're gonna venture into this together, and hopefully we come out the other side with a white Trini Lopez Dave Grohl style guitar. I've got all the parts off the guitar to start getting it prepped, and you can see all the components I have in there are decent quality. These are Gibson pickups and hardware, and I've done all the wiring myself. We'll stash these along with all the screws in a bag until we need them again. Next, let's take a look at the guitar itself. This copy was pretty faithful to the original, including holes drilled for a Nashville-style bridge instead of the import-style Tune-o-matic. The neck tenon is there. It doesn't look as pretty as a Gibson, but it's stable and the neck isn't warped, so it works for me. I found this reproduction orange label sticker, like the ones that are found inside the real Gibsons, and decided to put one in myself, and I had some fun coming up with my own serial number. This one has my initials listed as well as an important date. Now, let's talk about supplies. I'm using Rustoleum Auto grade paints for the guitar, starting with this sandable primer. For the color, I'm using this gloss white acrylic lacquer. Then we'll hit it with the gloss clear coats. I'm trying to make this finish as shiny as possible, so I'm stocking up on cans to really build up that clear coat. I bought sandpaper in 320, 400, 800, and 1000 grits. I grabbed a sanding block to try and keep the flat parts level, a tack cloth for wiping away debris and dust before spraying, and this fancy sprayer handle to hopefully get more control out of the cans. Every time I've tried painting a guitar before, I've run into the same issue that's caused me major problems: impatience. By documenting myself doing this, I'm hoping to avoid those problems by following these 3 rules. Number 1, take your time. Do each step right the first time, so you're not going back to try and fix mistakes. Rule number 2, trust the process. It's gonna look a lot worse before it starts to look a little bit better. And the last rule, and possibly the most important, be patient. Don't rush it. Know when to step away, know when to take a break, and come back to it when it's time to do the next step. And if it sounds like all 3 of these rules are kind of the same thing, it's because they are. But it bears repeating. You have to be patient when you're doing these painting projects. I'm serious, be patient. This is future Jeej telling past Jeej who's getting ready to do this project right now, be patient. So with the garage cleaned out, it was time to start sanding down the finish so I could spray some primer. There's one important rule I've learned when doing anything with a guitar. Start on the back. There's a few things that make this project a bit more difficult than most guitar refinishes I've seen. For one, most people that do this themselves are attempting it on a Fender style guitar like a Strat or a Tele. Both of those body shapes are very flat with few contours, which makes sanding much easier. Compare that to an ES335 style guitar, which is covered in complex carbs and basically isn't flat anywhere, so sanding is really difficult to do by hand and it's really easy to burn through the layers. That's why I'm trying to use a very light touch when sanding off the original finish. I only want to sand off the top layer of clear coat. Time to shoot the first few layers of primer. After 2 or 3 coats, I noticed this gritty texture forming on top of the guitar. I have to sand this flat before spraying the color coats. After waiting about 4 hours for the primer to dry, I started sanding the finish to try and take off that gritty texture. Unfortunately, it wasn't coming off easy, and the sandpaper was getting gummed up with splotches of primer that were scratching the finish. Okay, here's the thing. The primer still wasn't fully dry, so it was causing issues with the sandpaper. But I read the instructions on the Rustoleum can, and it says right here, for best results, allow to dry 2 to 4 hours before dry sanding. Rustoleum doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. This clearly wasn't working, so I had to refer back to my biggest rule: be patient. The primer still wasn't dry enough and was causing problems. I had to step away and pick this up in the morning. In the past, I would have tried to force my way through this step, and I probably would have ruined the project, but I decided to wait overnight, and I'm glad I did. It's the next morning, and immediately I could tell I was making way better progress. The primer was completely dry, the sandpaper was working way better, and I had a smooth, level finish in about an hour. I sprayed another coat of primer and re-leveled it, and we were ready for the white. I'm starting this out with a few light coats, just trying to build up the finish so I don't get any runs. The paint left a little of the same texture as the primer, so I decided to do some wet sanding to level it before I scraped the binding and the clear coat. I burned through the finish a little bit here while sanding. I just need to keep building up coats of white on top of this. With my color coat sanded before I started spraying clear, I needed to scrape the paint off of the binding. I decided it would be much easier to just scrape the paint off of the binding rather than to try to mask up the whole body and risk overspray and everything anyway. So I taped up a guard on a razor blade and got to work. So it looks like I left a little bit too much of the blade exposed when I was scraping and accidentally uncovered some of the black finish. So the only thing I can do now is finish scraping the whole body and then touch it up later with some extra paint. To be honest, I'm pretty proud of myself here. Usually when I try and paint guitars, something goes terribly, terribly wrong. And other than this one minor setback, things are looking really great. And I'm really happy with how the white's turning out, and it's all looking awesome, and I'm super excited. Here's what happened. I was using this tiny little eye hook with some paracord wrapped around it that was tied onto a beam in my garage. And the threaded part of the hook was screwed into where the strap button goes on my guitar, and it was just hanging there. And apparently, the threading on the screw stripped out, and it fell straight onto the headstock. So now that this has turned into a repair and refinish, I had to go back to the store and get more supplies. What the fuck? I'm using Vaseline here to prevent glue getting onto the truss rod and locking it up. I guess if there's any silver lining here, it's that the brake left a lot of surface area and minimal splinters to glue up. After a day, the glue is dry. Time to inspect the work and start cleaning up the area. Apparently when it snapped, a couple of pieces of wood completely evaporated into the void, so I'm filling those gaps with wood filler. So after doing all of that unplanned, unscheduled extra work, the headstock was properly secured back onto the neck, and we were finally back on track. But it was time to do clear coats. And the problem still remains that I have to hang that guitar back up in the garage. And there's not really any other way I can do that where I can easily reach every angle of the guitar body. So I'm gonna have to use that same hook hanging method that I used before. All we can do is tighten it down as much as possible, cross our fingers, and hope it doesn't fall again. I'm using the same method with the clear coats here, starting out with a couple of light dusting coats, and then after we get a nice base coat, then I start building it on a little bit thicker each time. It's really important that I don't overspray in any areas, especially the little areas in between the neck and the horns on the body, because if you overspray too much, you end up with runs in the finish, and that's a lot of extra sanding and extra work that you need to do. With the clear coats building up a nice shine, you can really see how the repair job on the headstock blends in and is almost undetectable from a couple feet away. If you're looking really close, you can see a couple flaws here. You can see the black poking out from where I was scraping the binding and scraped a little too far. Is it perfect? No. Is it good enough for me? So after shooting 2 full cans worth of clear acrylic lacquer on the guitar and building up a shiny finish, I had to let it dry for a week before I could do the final level sanding and buffing, which means I had to do the most difficult thing on this entire project so far. I had to wait. So after waiting a full week for the clear coat to finally dry, I'm using 800 grit sandpaper to try and level down the surface to get it as smooth and as dull as I can. This process takes a long time because there's a lot of surface area to cover on the guitar here, and I also don't want to sand too hard or use too much pressure because I can easily burn through that clear coat and even through the color coat, and we'll see the black underneath again, and I don't want to do that. Finally, it's time to start buffing, and I'm using a buffing wheel attachment for my hand drill and some Meguiar's car polish to buff up the finish to hopefully a high gloss. Looks like I forgot to charge the drill battery.
So 2 balls, and they have 1 run and 1 out. But I will say, Jim, here we go. Here we go.
The drill's finally recharged, and I'm really excited because we're buffing the front of the guitar. And this is the face of the guitar that everyone will see the most, and I want this to look really shiny and really good. This is kind of the step where the fruits of your labor come to fruition, right? I mean, you get to see this shiny guitar that you've been working on, and it's looked so bad for so long, and now it's finally gonna look the way you want it to. When I took the masking tape off of the fretboard, there was a lot of tape residue left over and some dust that stuck to that. So I'm using some steel wool to just clean that off, and it comes off really easily. Here I am sanding and buffing the face of the headstock. There was another chip that kind of came out of the front of the headstock that I also had to fill with some wood filler. And instead of trying to tape up the entire white guitar just so I could spray some more black paint on it, I got a little touch-up brush that was the same type of lacquer and just kind of filled in that area where some chunks of the face of the headstock were missing. It's got some scars, and if you're looking really close, you can see it. It's been nearly a full month of painting and waiting and dropping and re-gluing and fixing, but here we are. The finish looks great, and it's finally time to reassemble this guitar. When I originally disassembled the guitar, I had to snip the wires that connected the pickups to the wiring harness, so I'm feeding them back through the body, and I'll resolder them once I get everything put back in its place. When I was soldering up this wiring harness, I decided to try and make it as easy on myself as possible. The thing about doing wiring on a 335 or semi-hollow style guitar is that there's no control access plate. So you have to fish everything through, in this case, the diamond holes. And it's a lot like building a ship in a bottle. In order to expedite this process, I decided to do as much wiring as I can outside the guitar, and then I stuff everything in and get them repositioned. I'm purposefully not showing you a very good close-up angle of me soldering because I don't want a bunch of guitar nerds on the internet to make fun of me for my poor soldering skills. That's not what this video is about. This video is about a bunch of guitar nerds on the internet making fun of my guitar painting skills. We're using any method we can to get that output jack and all the potentiometers fished through the inside of the guitar body and to find their way back into the mounting holes in the guitar. I wish I could say there's an easy way to do this, but I've been doing it for a long time, and I always feel kind of like an idiot when I try and do it. But eventually everything finds its way back, and after a little bit of swearing and a lot of fumbling around, we've got all the electronics back in place. Finally time to put some strings back on, and the entire time I'm doing this I'm holding my breath because up until this point I still don't know if that headstock repair is going to hold. I won't know for sure until the guitar is completely tuned up, and I give it about a day for the tension to settle in, and I want to make sure no hairline cracks or fractures reappear on the line where I glued it back up. Well, we did it. We have a white Dave Grohl Gibson replica guitar. I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed. I think this turned out a lot better than I was expecting. Is it perfect? No. Absolutely not. If you're looking at this up really close, you can see there's some dings. There's some little specks of dirt that made their way into the finish from my garage spray booth environment. There's some cracks. The headstock came off at one point, but all in all, I mean, it still plays great and it still sounds really good, and I think it looks pretty good. The name of the game with this is to create something that looks really good from about 10 feet away on a stage. When I'm playing with my Foo Fighters tribute band, I want somebody to look at this and go, whoa, where did he get that white DG-335? Somehow, despite all of my careful sanding and buffing, I managed to buff straight through to the black on the edge of the neck. That's a bummer, but if I really wanted to, I could go back and respray, put more clear coat on, resand it, rebuff it, but I got a white guitar and it looks awesome. For a DIY project that I did in my garage just because I had a crazy idea one day, I think it turned out pretty great. So now the question, should you do this to your guitar? That depends. If you're somebody who has a lot of patience and knows how to follow instructions and knows how to take your time with things and doesn't get impatient and want to rush things, sure, give it a shot. Really, I think the most difficult thing is the time it takes and the patience and having to sacrifice your entire garage for 4.5 weeks because you have a guitar hanging in the middle of it. If the question is, am I going to do this again? Hell no. This was really hard. I'm impatient. I don't like to take my time doing things, and it was excruciating waiting to do the next step sometimes. And every time I hit a roadblock or the headstock snapped off, it was just so demoralizing. I was like, I just want to be done with this. There were so many times I just wanted to throw my hands up and be like, throw it in the firewood pile or something. I don't know. But I'm glad that I filmed this because I think that kept me honest with the project, and it kept me on track, and it kept me from rushing through, and ultimately from throwing my hands up and just giving up. And yeah, let's hear how it sounds. Thank you everybody for watching this. If you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to my channel. I love doing more of these long form videos here on YouTube, and it's cool to have these projects that take me a little bit longer than some of my short form content. So this was a fun project. Foo Fighters rule. I'm excited to use this at my next gigs. Gibson, if you're watching this, or Epiphone, please do another production run of Dave Grohl guitars. Everyone is waiting. Hopefully by the time you're watching this, they've already been announced. Yeah. I think that's it. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.